pretty sure the people saying gas the Jews aren't going to be on the right side of history.
Well, history has told us that those people don't come out well.
Yes, when you come against God's chosen, it often doesn't go well for you. In the long run.
Welcome to another episode of the Firebrand Podcast. I'm Maggie Ulmer, and I'm sitting here with Dr. David Watson and Dr. Scott Kisker, and we have another conversation today. What are we talking about, David?
We're talking about the recent uptick in anti-Semitic actions that are taking place throughout the U.S. and Western Europe, and in particular on college campuses.
All right, just for the sake of terms and definitions, what is anti-Semitism?
Anti-Semitism is
I know you love it when I spring that on you.
Being
a prejudice
Semites.
against Jews. You know, I mean, that's how the term is used.
Yeah.
Anyway, as a prejudice against Jews. Yeah.
Yep.
So anti-Judaism,
Right.
anti-Jewish people,
Okay.
I guess is how I'd put it.
And you have a Substack about this coming out soon.
By the time this episode drops, it will be out on my
Have been
Substack.
out, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what?
It's at davidfwatson3.substack.com.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
So there has been a rise of hostility towards Jewish people in this country that is really bizarre.
Yeah. And
I can honestly say I never thought I would see.
No, not ever. No.
like people openly saying things like "gas the Jews."
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
chance
Yeah.
like that. It boggles the mind. Weren't we on the other side of World War II, as I recall?
Yeah. So, one of the in this article in Substack, I quoted a CNN article, and I'll quote from that: "Rising hate is tangible. The idea that Jewish Americans studying at Cornell University could so fear for their lives on their Ivy League campus in rural New York that they couldn't even eat together in 2023 seems almost impossible to believe. Yet it's the case after death threats were posted online. Tensions were already high after a Cornell professor said he was initially exhilarated over the Hamas attacks at a pro-Palestinian event because the group had changed the balance of power. He later apologized for his choice of words." Mm-hmm. His choice of words.
Yeah, not the sort of the moral posture of the
If he'd been
intent.
more polite about his happiness over
Right, somehow that would be acceptable.
the largest killing of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust, it would have been okay, I guess, is what he thinks.
But I think this is only going to, make Jews, Israeli Jews are always, in conflict with one another politically about how to negotiate the relationships between Palestinians. But man, now the need for a Jewish homeland where you are not going to be subject to pogroms because you have no military and you have no force is, if I were Jewish, I'd be like, no.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening.
Yeah. I am not.
I think it's consolidating Jewish people, especially in Israel.
But I think also in the United States and other places where they felt safe, where they were like, do we really need a nation state? I'm happy in my. The number of Jewish students at Cornell University, at least back in the day when I used to visit Cornell University to visit my Jewish friend, Ben Resner, was, huge. Nobody felt threatened. It's weird.
Yeah. So here's another quote that I used from the Washington Post. Jewish students at Cooper Union in New York City sheltered in a library as pro-Palestinian demonstrators banged on the glass walls of the building. Mm-hmm. At a pro-Palestinian protest near Tulane University, at least 2 students were assaulted in a melee that began when someone tried to burn an Israeli flag, and an anonymous protester flooded a Cornell message board with threats, prompting the school's president to alert the FBI. If you see a Jewish person on campus, follow them home and slit their throats, one message said.
Oh my gosh.
Another threatened to bring an assault rifle to campus and shoot all you pig Jews.
I don't understand why this is happening. I mean...
Well, I think it has to do with the ways in which the history of Israel is being portrayed certainly in college campuses, but also how everything is being portrayed in college campuses as a conflict between the oppressed and the oppressor. And of course, all of these, people getting their educations at Ivy League schools identify with the oppressed, ironically enough, right?
And
They're all the oppressed,
right.
Having their $80,000 a year educations on park-like campuses. It's so ridiculous.
So they're saying, they're identifying somehow Jews as the oppressing class.
They are the oppressor.
The oppressor.
Because in the historical narrative that they have taught themselves, Israel at some point invaded this territory, took it over, and colonized it,
right,
and pushed out the indigenous population.
So what they're doing is decolonizing. What Hamas did is decolonizing.
Yeah. I'd like to decolonize Cornell University.
Okay.
I guarantee that the people who are occupying that space are not the original inhabitants on the
right. So I think Scott's right. I think for a long time the primary sort of heuristic device for understanding the world has been power relations.
Right.
Some people have power and some people don't have power. And you have to take power from the people who have power and give it to the people who don't have power. And they see the Israelis...
Which, of course, is never ending, because then the people who don't have power and need to have that power taken away from them in order to give it to the people who don't have power.
Yeah.
It's a little circular. But it's exactly the sort of, it's not based on economics and in exactly the same way, but it's the Marxist
you divide up
theory
the world,
of history.
Yeah. It's
where
all struggle between classes of people.
It's classes, and so the power needs to be taken away from the aristocracy and given to the bourgeoisie, and then it gets taken away from the bourgeoisie, given it to the workers. And if only the workers of the world would unite, there would be a workers' utopia. Of course.
But wouldn't they then just be in power?
Well, yeah, they have to execute the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. That's what happens in all that. Yeah.
Every place communism is implemented, a lot of people die in the process, a lot.
Yeah.
And so it historically has proven itself to be utterly untenable and immoral, but that doesn't stop academics from pursuing and promoting its tenets. Now, so when your primary narrative is that the world consists simply of these various types of power relations, and that power has to be taken from some and given to others, then through that rather simplistic narrative, the Israeli and Palestinian relationship probably seems relatively straightforward. But in fact, it's far more complicated than that. And people seem not to remember that the reason the State of Israel was created in the first place was because there was no safe place for Jews. I mean, the State of Israel was created post-Holocaust, when 1/3 of the Jews in Europe were murdered.
But the immigration of Jews to that part of the world was also done because of the bad situation when England was, when you had the British Mandate of that area, that British allowed Jews to return to that part of the world, partly to improve its economics, but also to provide a safe place for a people who have been subject to pogroms throughout Europe and the rest of the world for centuries, literally.
Right. So the Holocaust, like, it didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
It was the culmination of centuries of European anti-Semitism. And, I mean, we find this in a lot of Christian theologians, actually. You can go back through the Fathers and find lots of very anti-Semitic rhetoric. You can find it in Martin Luther and his work concerning the Jews and their lies. And, I mean, the things that he prescribes for Jews are horrible. They're horrible things. They weren't realized in his lifetime, but they were realized in later, like the burning of synagogues and the burning of Torahs and these kinds of things. And so the Holocaust was the culmination of all of this. And I think the world realized we've got to do something here. And so in that sense, it would satisfy the group of people who are deeply concerned, who only see the world through the lens of power relationships. But now, so in the 1967 war, Israel was invaded by surrounding countries, and they took the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. And so their territory
Which
expanded.
previously to that were parts of
Jordan,
Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt.
Right.
Not parts of Palestine,
Right.
which has not ever been a country.
So people have talked a lot about the two-state solution and these kinds of things, but it's not entirely Israel that has prevented the two-state solution from happening. I mean, there have been Palestinian leaders who don't really want a two-state solution.
Has there ever been a Palestinian leader who agreed to any sort of two-state solution?
Well, I think when Yitzhak Rabin was the the prime minister in Israel? Is that what Netanyahu is? Yeah.
Yeah.
There were conversations around that.
I know there's been conversations. There continue to be conversations, but I don't think there's ever been a solution that granted statehood, a Palestinian statehood, that was ever acceptable to an authority over Palestinians.
Yeah. So what's happened is that Israel has sort of military control over these areas. And I'm not going to say that the way in which Israel executes military control is always fair or good or righteous. And I'm not saying that there weren't Arabs living in those areas who, didn't get shafted badly. But nevertheless, the idea that somehow that Israel has colonized this area is simply a false narrative. It doesn't work historically. It's far more complex than that. And so the narrative now of decolonization is simply nonsense. It's a lie.
So I think that's all very helpful. I think one of the things that so just speaking about, I'm just thinking right now about our country, America. And I'm thinking about one of the interesting dynamics about what you're describing in terms of power is that if the goal is to always shift power to those who don't have power, then are we looking at the eventual sort of disintegration of even ideological loyalties? Like, isn't the logical end of this just mercenary behavior? Like people who just collect around the idea that that person shouldn't have power, that we may not agree on everything, but we agree that that person shouldn't be in power.
I think the end is the will to power.
Yeah.
It's that I should be the one who
Personally.
has power. Yeah, I or my group should be the one who actually has power. Because if we get power, then we will use power justly. Finally, somebody will use power justly, and it will be us. I think that's the end game. Now, not everyone, I think, would agree with that. But for me, in these kinds of discourses that are fixated on power relationships, and I'm not saying power relationships don't exist or they're unimportant or anything like that. It's just that that's one set of issues among many that have to be accounted for when you're talking about complex matters of human life.
And the whole important aspect of the founding, at least of this country, is that you have to balance power. Like no one has
all the power. Yeah.
And every node of power is in some sense independent and is balanced against the other nodes, which is done in order for the preservation of the liberty of the people.
Right.
You know, you have to balance power in order to make sure that no one has the power and the people can have freedom.
I feel like there's something happening though ideologically, which is groups that I feel like I'm trying to be really careful because I don't want to make, first of all, I just don't enjoy talking about political things because it's impossible. You're going to step on a landmine no matter what. Not that I'm necessarily afraid of that, but I'm just trying to work out something here in my head, which is I feel like I'm seeing groups that previously would have been aligned. So I would just say, politically, groups that would have been previously politically aligned are now not. And it seems to be centered around Jews. And
I do think the political alliances are shaking up, not just in that way, but in many different ways.
Yes. And I think that this is just one of the more sort of current and loud examples that we're seeing of it. But like, say, for instance, the ACLU and not in the ACLU. I have no idea what they've said, but like this is historically a politically liberal group, and
but far more progressive now than it once
was. Yeah.
Because there was a time when the ACLU would defend non-progressive causes in the interest of civil rights, liberties.
Yeah, liberties. That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but now it's like people who are identifying within that group are now then also, I don't know, it's just weird. I'm not understanding what's happening right now. It's like people from both sides of the political aisle are also participating in anti-Semitic rhetoric. It's very confusing to me, and I don't quite understand what the hostility towards Jews in particular is.
Well, that's a very long conversation.
It's a minority group that wherever it goes, though without coercive power of its own, is successful over against the native population.
And that has given rise to a lot of conspiracy theories over the years. So I was just sometimes I listen to Jonah Goldberg's podcast, The Remnant, which I like Jonah Goldberg. I think he's an incredibly reasonable person. But he was interviewing a guy who'd written a book on the Rothschild family, and they are a kind of a famous Jewish family, European Jewish family, German, and this family acquired incredible wealth, and so
French.
all
Aren't they French?
Maybe I'd have to listen to it.
Wealthy
again,
Ashkenazi Jewish family from Frankfurt.
Oh,
okay.
Nope. Sorry, my bad.
So they, so because of their success, all of these conspiracy theories rose up around them, and they are kind of emblematic of Jewish conspiracy theories that have popped up across the centuries. I think the title of this guy's book is Jewish Space Lasers or something like that. Yeah. So I'd like to read it, actually. I mean, it sounded fascinating. I don't know if I'll have time. But I would recommend that podcast. I think the name of the podcast is called Rothschild Abuse, which isn't a great title, but nevertheless, that is what it's called, and it's on the Remnant podcast with Jonah Goldberg. But so there have long been conspiracy theories about Jews, and this is just a recent iteration of that. So the fact that it's occurring now isn't particularly surprising. But you would expect it on something like 4chan, QAnon, something like that. You don't expect it
in Cornell.
You don't expect it. It seems to be like almost in the mainstream of society now.
Yeah.
And that I was just so naive. I just thought that would not happen. But it seems to have happened.
Yeah. I think that, having grown up, being taught in school about the Holocaust, and, of course, when you're in 6th, 7th grade, you read Diary of Anne Frank, you study. I lived in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and went to the Holocaust Museum, which
I've
is,
been there. Yeah.
It's really, really surprising, and to me, that this is what is happening now. And I don't know, I find myself at a loss for words or ability to comprehend.
Right. You've realized it's like the progressives the day after Donald Trump won.
Yeah,
there are a whole bunch of people in this country who think a way I can't conceivably think.
I mean, I was kind of baffled by it myself, but actually, I kind of understood why it happened. I was like, well, you guys didn't see something that a lot of people saw, but
what I'm saying is, you're experiencing
yes,
that
I'm
kind
so
of like,
confused.
What world am I living in now?
Yeah.
Where there are these kinds of sentiments being expressed publicly, openly, and proudly, as it were.
Well, and the other...
because there's always been, like, crazies, right? I mean, there's always, like, neo-Nazis and...
Yeah, but this isn't that.
I know, that's what I mean. This is, like, mainstream. These are, like I said, kids whose parents are paying $80,000 a year for them to go to university. Cornell,
or wherever.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, too, is this is so wildly un-American. You know what I mean? Like, I understand that the sort of ideological landscape of our country has been shifting for a long time. But so, there's mercy and compassion for Native populations. There's mercy and compassion for different ethnic groups, but not for this group.
Right.
And I'm just like, why? And in my mind, so I'm not one who bends towards conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories to me are, it's not that I don't think that there aren't broadly executed agendas at work in the world. I think that there are. But I think conspiracy theories are different than that. I think that they rely on kind of unrealistic cohesion of human agreement. Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody has to keep a secret. Everybody has to... just like, people don't do that. But,
well, most conspiracy theories assume too rational a world.
Yeah.
Although there are, at times, conspiracies, right?
Sure.
We know that there are conspiracies, and so not every conspiracy theory is going to be wrong, but generally speaking, I agree with you on that. But I was listening to the Glop podcast, which is, I just think that podcast is hilarious. It has John Podhoretz, Rob Long, and Jonah Goldberg on it. And they were talking about this, right? And one of the things they were saying is, like, on these college campuses, there is this tendency towards safetyism. Mm. So I have to go to my safe space so I don't hear you say something that might be a microaggression to me. And like, for
but
example,
if I say gas the Jews,
right.
suddenly
I can't use the phrase master bedroom but I can I can say gas the Jews, and it's like, what's going on here, right? Why is this one ethnic group being singled out in such a way that the rules that apply regarding everyone else don't apply to them?
Yes, that is my question.
Yeah. And I don't really have an answer for that. I mean, I think it is a continuation of a long trend where Jews have been singled out.
This is where I was going with my conspiracy theory thing. My mind doesn't want to say that it is related to religion. I don't want to say that, but in my core, like when you start to eliminate what all of the other possible options are, I feel like that's where you end up.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to emphasize in this article is that if you think that the Israeli government's policies towards Palestinians are unnecessarily harsh or unfair or unjust, that doesn't make you an anti-Semite.
No.
That makes you a critic of the Israeli government.
And there are plenty of Israelis
who are
critical of the Israeli government.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, I've
and at least had different views on what the solution should be.
Yeah, exactly. The people here think that in Israel it's Israelis against there are essentially two sides.
There are Palestinians who were Israeli nationals.
Well, there are Arabs who are. Yeah.
Well, there are. I mean, what do you mean by Palestinian? These are people who.
I mean, people who live in the West Bank, the Golan Heights, or the Gaza Strip.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there are also people who identify ethnically as Palestinian who are Israeli citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have representation in the government too. Mm-hmm. But so I've been in the West Bank 3 times, which isn't very much. It doesn't give me any kind of expertise on this. But talking with people in the West Bank and talking with Israelis, what you see is that there aren't 2 sides to this discussion. There are 100 sides to this discussion. Not all Palestinians agree on what the solution should be. Not all Israelis agree on what the solution should be. It's far more complex than people think it is over here. And there are a lot of people, both Palestinians and Israelis, who would like to see peace, who would like to see something worked out where the Palestinians could live their lives and the Israelis could live their lives and not worry about killing each other. But there are enough people who don't want that, not just on the Palestinian side either, right? There are radicalized Israelis too. And there are enough people that don't want that it keeps the conflict going. Not to mention, interference from outside countries like Iran, through Hezbollah and Hamas. I think what's happening is that something has been lying under the surface in the Western world for a long time. And the incursion by Hamas into Israel, where so many Jews were killed, I mean, not combatants either, like people at a music festival.
Yeah, that was...
It's a pogrom.
Yeah,
I mean, these things happened in Europe all the time, prior to Israel having a homeland, right? And the Holocaust is simply the worst pogrom to date to that point, right?
Yeah.
But there seems to me just to be an absolute ignorance of history and the movement of ethnicities around the globe and how that just works out. That is being placed in a kind of neo-Marxist, simplistic framework. I mean, there's a reason why France is France and not a province named Gaul of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Because the Franks took over.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I get, I mean, I'm just a grumpy old historian, so it's all fine. But
You've just described historians.
that was redundant.
What's the takeaway from this conversation, David?
Humility.
Okay, that's Scott's takeaway.
I think that the takeaway is that the kind of anti-Jewish sentiment that has anti-Semitic sentiment that has appeared, that has become manifest in the last few weeks, has probably been building for a long time, and it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And the church needs to confront it.
Yeah.
The church needs to call it out and say it's wrong. That doesn't mean that that you're carrying water for the state of Israel or anything like that, although I do want to just go on record and say I believe that the state of Israel has a right to exist. I think its existence is a good thing. That doesn't mean that I agree with everything the state of Israel does, and many Jewish people don't either. Mm. So this is dangerous. The church needs to confront it, and if we don't confront it, we're negligent in our witness.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason many Israelis don't agree with the government is for the same reason that many Americans don't agree with their government. It's a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people actually get to vote,
Yeah.
and they have discussions, and there's freedom of expression.
Yeah, right.
Which, go try that in other nations.
Iran. In Marxist
Well, yes.
countries.
Go try that in China.
Yeah.
Go try that in Russia. Go try that in Iran. Go try that in Saudi Arabia. See how it goes for you.
Yeah.
So what's your takeaway, Scott?
Look, the whole purpose of studying history is an exercise in humility. Mm-hmm. And if you're the righteous, you've missed the mark. If you honestly believe that I'm not saying that you shouldn't voice your opinions nonviolently if you're going to be a Christian, right? If you're not a Christian, violence is always an option. That's how Arabs got into the Levant in the first place. So, but if you're going to be a Christian, you need to realize that you cannot work your way to atone for your sins, let alone the sins of the whole world. Mm. And also, you're not righteous. Mm. Even your, belief that you're on the right side of history and you're protesting evil is a mixed bag, no matter what your position is.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it with a clean heart and do not harm your neighbor, I mean, the civil rights movement, for the most part, is a great example of this. Some of the apartheid, anti-apartheid work was that way, but once you take up arms, once you start calling for the extermination of people made in the image of God, mm-hmm. You're outside of you're outside.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's been our podcast today, friends. And we'll come back to you in the next conversation. Bye.
Bye.